Nisha, it's just such a real honor and joy to be with you today to talk a little bit, because I know we only have a little bit of time, about your extraordinary film, To Kill a Tiger. And I wonder if we could just start at the beginning and you could share a bit about how you came to this project. Were you looking for a story like this one to tell? Did you hear about this extraordinarily courageous family on the radio and a newspaper from a friend? How did you find this story, and why did you feel like you needed to be the one to help it reach a broader audience?
So lovely to meet you, I have to say. So thank you for doing this. The beginning. I was making a film about masculinity in India. That was the original premise. It was the original idea. And I was, in order to make that film, I was following the work of the NGO that's featured in the doc. And they had started a gender sensitization program across the state of Jharkhand in 30 villages. And, and my original idea was to actually track that work, which was 3.5 years. And they were working with men and boys for 3.5 years in these villages. And the idea was that I would follow the transformation and the journey of some of these men and boys. And one of the men that was enrolled in the program was Ranjit, and that's how I met him, and that's how I came across the story. And interestingly enough, he wasn't one of the people that I was initially following. So when I met him for the first time, this had just happened to his daughter. And literally the first time I met him or his family, I had a camera. I had a camera in my hand, and they allowed us to, very graciously, they allowed us in and allowed us to start to document the process of their journey.
It is quite striking how kind of open and inviting, I think that is the right verb, not only Ranjit is, but Kiran, her mother, her younger siblings very much are. And I mean, I'm sure since, this was a story of kind of many years, at some point into it, maybe they forgot about you being there. But even at the beginning, they seem quite um, just clear and confident that it's the right thing for them to have you there telling kind of their story. Were you surprised by that, kind of as a filmmaker, that it wasn't only Ranjit, but really the whole family seemed deeply committed um, to telling their story, to having their story told, to having their story told in a quite kind of robust and honest way. It does not feel kind of overly filtered or curated. Was that surprising to you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was, it was a process, right? So for sure, the first few months, it was difficult for it was difficult for me as well, right? Like I was also awkward because of just given the nature of the material, the sensitivity of the material, there the obvious kind of class and the class difference, right? I mean, just this idea of me having a certain kind of power. So I was conscious of all of those things. And they were, for the first couple of months, I would say they were nervous and a bit shy around me. And it wasn't always so deeply intimate. It was a little bit of we had to get to know each other. And we did, both on camera and off camera. But there was a moment during the filming and in my relationship with the family. It's about 2 or 3 months in, and it was so clear at that moment in that scene that they had just forgotten that the camera was even there, that we had just become a part of, the settings, right? That they were so at ease with us being there, and I think that shift then kind of just defined the rest of the filming process, and just continues, right, in our relationship with them today.
It was, I think, quite wonderful to see kind of at the end of the film that you do remain in touch with the family. yeah, before we get to the end, so kind of the beginning, you met Ranjit through his having been enrolled in a program with the NGO that's featured. I didn't know that until this conversation. I think it is really just quite extraordinary the level of courage that he and his daughter, his wife, and the whole family demonstrates throughout, the many years of their lives that you kind of are there to kind of observe, but also I think offer some level of protection. Although, there are moments in the story, particularly later on, where they ask like that there not be cameras or there kind of not be filming because they don't want to kind of there to be unnecessary agitation in an already tense situation. I did get the feeling, particularly kind of at the beginning, that you offered a layer of protection for the family too, that kind of by being there and kind of bearing witness, that was, not only kind of further testament to the family's courage, but also kind of a protective effect. Is that, do you think, a fair assessment as a viewer?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And we asked the family, we asked the family about this repeatedly, especially after he was threatened. Do
Well,
you
and threatened, and like, and their home was threatened, and someone threatened to burn down their fields. I mean, it wasn't only his safety, it was kind of I mean, his life, his livelihood were all threatened.
family? It was, and then eventually the crew as well. But throughout the process, we were repeatedly asking them, on camera and off camera, right? Like, um, are you okay with this? Do you want us to keep going? Should we continue to film? Are you doing this because you feel indebted to the crew or you feel indebted to the NGO, right? Because there is a class difference in India, and you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge the power dynamics that are at
And
play.
did his answer ever change? Because certainly on film, it very much is a consistent, like, I'm doing this for my daughter. And at the end, it seems to be, he's also doing it for other people's daughters. I mean, I think at the end he says, if, hopefully this doesn't happen in other villages, in the future. Hopefully, girls will not be raped, in our village or elsewhere. My words are perhaps more blunt than his, but it is that very much that sense of kind of a hope kind of for this generation to be different. But for much of it, it very much feels quite oriented to his daughter to fight for what his daughter wants, which is justice.
Yeah, yeah, she really was in so many ways. She's really kind of the moral center of the film. And it was so interesting because throughout the process, I mean, there were definitely, like, at the beginning, her mom says, "Do you think it's right that we call the police?" And so she was nervous about it, right? And Ranjit at one point also began to think it's too much, and can I do this? It started to feel overwhelming. But she never actually changed course. She never vacillated. Like, for her, it was so clear that this was something that she deserved, that she had been wronged and that she deserved justice. She just felt that so intrinsically. And her both of her parents, I mean, they both stood by her, right? And I think it's also partly why she is healing. I think that it's also rooted in the fact that she had so much support and love from her parents and her family. They really took her side, right? And I mean, they were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, you know. So
And I think that deep love and kind of love in action and solidarity is so palpable from her parents, throughout the film in the kind of in the small and profound ways. I mean, whether it's kind of the, I think we forget how often laborious the justice process is, whether in India or the United States, that, it requires an enormous amount of time and energy. And there are these moments where, I think like, the NGO or the prosecutor, kind of other lawyers are saying like, you have to be part of this too. Like this has to be, something that your family is really committed to, because it's not just showing up on this court date, it's showing up on many court dates, and kind of all that is required, in the pursuit of justice, to
Yeah.
continue to ask families to kind of expose their pain, but also just kind of to upend their lives. He even says he has to borrow money. He can't always be there when he needs to be there for his family, his younger children, kind of his work in the fields. Um, that enormous amount of commitment is something that I think the film also really does a good job of showing, that it's not only the courage of going to the police, after
Yeah.
their daughter was gang raped. It's kind of the courage and the consistency of everything from there until a few years later when the verdict finally comes down.
It's the work, right? It's the kind of the sort of consistent and persistent and the tenacity, I think, that he showed and his family showed, which was really, really extraordinary. We showed the film. We've shown the film to a few people in India who were part of the film, apart from the family, of course. And one of the people that we showed the film to was the public prosecutor, the person with the lawyer with the red hair. And he said that, and a few other of his lawyer friends, and he said that for him, to see it was so important because he saw the other side. He saw
Mm.
what it took for a family, especially somebody, a family with such little resources and means, what it took for them to fight, like just how profound of an experience, profound of an experience it was. The other thing I just have to say, Chelsea, is one of the things that I asked Ranjit after it was all over is if he missed it. Like if there was a part of him that missed the work that was involved. Because in so many ways it defined his life for such a long period of time. And it also, I think, took him on this journey that was pretty extraordinary, where he had to go pretty deep inside of himself, right? He had to really look at himself as a human being and as a man, and I think he understood what he was made of, right? So it was also, as tragic as it was and as awful as it was, there was something about it that gave him meaning and also made him see his strength and what he was capable of. So it gave him a tremendous amount of self-belief and confidence.
One of the kind of characters in the story, if that is the right framing, and those are admittedly my words, not yours. So it's presumptuous, certainly. You really kind of is the village itself and the different kind of dynamics in the village of kind of, the impetus among many for there to be a compromise initially. The compromise seems to be that Karen marry one of her rapists, which certainly to me doesn't feel like much of a compromise at all, to kind of some ill-defined kind of recognition of guilt and responsibility, because an interesting kind of dynamic is that no one in the village seems to think they're anything but guilty, even though they plead not guilty initially. They all sort of take their guilt for granted, but kind of what to do with that guilt, how to recognize it, or how to ignore it, how to paper over it, how to move beyond it. It seems to mainly be a focus on how do we move beyond it, kind of irrespective of what the right answer is for Kieran and her family. What was it like to sort of incorporate the village as a character into the story? Not only as kind of the ways in which kind of Kieran and her family were effective, but also kind of what was happening in the village itself, because where the village seems to be at the end is actually quite different than where they were at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was really clear, right? That the community and their perspective and what they wanted was going to be, positioned as the opposition and the obstacle, one of the many obstacles that Ranjit has to navigate and deal with, right? The other being, of course, the court system itself, and then the third sort of being his own insecurity as a man and as a human being. And so, and the village, of course, I would say was probably the most formidable, the most formidable obstacle and the most formidable challenge. I think for me it was very difficult to try to get them to to represent their views, right? Like the only person who really spoke openly with us was the ward member, and he was great. And it
And
was
very candid.
very candid and incredible that he that he allowed us to film him as much as we did, and gave us, was truthful, right? um uh, so there was a lot of, there was a lot of work, there was a lot of effort, that on my part and the part of the crew, to try to get the villagers to not think of us as the enemy, but rather people who were interested in their perspective,
Mm.
people who had a very clear view, which was what's happened here is wrong. um, they also understood it was wrong. Nobody condoned the act itself. No one took the side of the boys. They just wanted it to be handled in a different way. And so for me, there was a lot of effort put into to try to create a bridge, and to get them to sort of open up and give me, their perspective, and so we could have an open conversation, an open dialogue. And we only managed to do that a couple of times, right? Once was in the beginning with the women, when they're talking to the NGO workers about what they think, and then the second time is in the group session where the boys' fathers tell
Yes.
us what they think, and they talk to us pretty openly. Those were the only two times. So it was always very difficult to get the people in the community not to see us as outsiders or as the enemy. And of course, we weren't successful, because near the end, right, there's that major eruption where the crew is threatened, and we have to leave. And after that moment, we never went back into the community.
You
So
never went back. That was my next question, is if you had ever gone back after that moment.
never went back. Never went back. We want to go now, though. We want to go at we do want to go now, because we feel, that it is, our responsibility to work with that community. You know, it's if you think about what this story is and what we hope to do with it. I mean, ultimately, the film is about impact, right? It's really about how do we use this film to create change, and to move the needle on a number of different issues and a number of different levels. So, I see the community as being part of. They have given us something. They've, you know what I mean? Like they've.
Yes.
It's an offering in a way, as tragic as it is, and as horrible as it was. It is an offering. It's something that we can now take and learn from. It's like what Ranjit, at one point, Ranjit says in the film. Yeah, this was a sacrifice that my daughter made, right? I see this as a sacrifice that she's made. So
I think it's toward the end of the film, and it's like, this is, I can't remember his exact words, but effectively, like, this is noble, and this is, more important than us. Um, I was quite struck by the lawyer for the defendants, who basically said, well, like, this just isn't the West.
yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
we have, what did she think was going to happen
Right.
to
Yeah.
her? Like, I don't even trust my own son. I mean, when she said that, I thought, well, what is your responsibility as a parent?
Yes.
Um, I ask as a parent, where I think I have a deep responsibility, um, to my children, to what I believe the right values are, what I believe just sort of the right is, regardless of kind of what one's faith might be. Randy does talk quite a bit about God, as do other members of his family, and kind of what their responsibility to God is. I'm a deep person of faith as well. I also think we shouldn't need a God to make, the right choices for ourselves, for others, and ultimately, for our community. But I was quite struck by that. How much do you think that attitude has changed in the 8 years um, since this horrific crime was committed, and today? Do you think there are still many kind of women and men, in that village, or kind of in that area of India, who still have this attitude of like, well, you just can't trust boys, or it's always the girl's fault?
Yes, I do. I don't think that, I think this idea of there being a revolution that suddenly changes a mindset and a culture that's so, where misogyny is so deeply entrenched in every single system. As you point out, right, the lawyer herself, and it's a her, you
That's
know,
what I found so striking because it was,
yeah. So she
I guess I'm showing
herself,
my own biases, but that it was someone who'd been trained in the law,
yeah,
who was a woman, who was a mother.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, the question then becomes like, how do you change, uh, how do you change culture, right? Like, how do you actually move the needle in a substantial way? And if you're looking at a country like India, which is so layered and so complex, and it just exists on so many different levels, in terms of caste and class and urban and rural, tribal, non-tribal. Like, it's such a complicated place. So to kind of have a revolution where something is changed very profoundly is not possible, and it's very slow, systematic sensitization that has to happen. Which is why I think the NGOs, those activists and those grassroots activists and the work that they do is so important.
So I guess, Nisha, like, what is your hope for the film? How do you hope it can be part of, if not catalyzing a revolution, being mindful of all that you just said, but hopefully accelerating change so that not more, but all girls' lives, are valued, both in the kind of cultural and normative sense, but also, in a legal and structural sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'll answer, like, so there's two parts of this for us. I mean, one part, of course, is that we're working with an organization called Equality Now, and so they see this film as a way to actually have legal change and legal reform. The one thing that's so interesting about India, and I don't know how many people know this, but the laws in India around rape are actually very progressive and really
And
robust.
I've gotten even more so, right? I mean, there are references in the film to kind of recent legislation, um, which are quite, I think, very strong and have a lot to
Yeah.
teach us here in the United States and in many other countries.
Yeah, they have the real teeth. It's the issue is not so much the law itself. The issue is the implementation, right? Which was that's culture, right? That changing the perception that women value less than men is culture, and that's a lot of work. And you need the law. You do need the law to advocate for that. That's an important systemic change that needs to happen in many countries. But then you also need to be able to change the culture so that the law actually is effective and it's being implemented. So Equality Now is going to be working with the film and using it to sort of reform laws in parts of the world. And then the other work that we're doing is we're using the film to encourage other survivors to come forward. And then for it's like the reason I started this thing in the first place, right, was to kind of understand masculinity. Because for me, I realized that in so many ways this is the missing piece. You can only advocate for women's rights and gender justice for so long, and ask women to carry the burden, for their equality. You actually have to address masculinity, and you have to invite men into the fold. You have to get them to see, which is something that I saw over the course of making this film, is that this system of patriarchy that we operate under is actually oppressive for everyone. It's
Yes.
not real, it's a construction. And how do you get men and boys to understand that they have a certain kind of power under this system, but it also comes at a cost, and we have to bring them into the conversation.
Well, there's I think, admonition that I think about quite a lot, from Sally Ride and Wright Edelman, that it's, kind of hard to be what you can't see. It's hard to imagine ourselves in ways that we haven't yet seen. I think that it is generally kind of thought of as it relates to women and girls. It's also, though, of course, true, for men. And I think that's part of what's so powerful kind of in in sharing Ranjit's story and of his own kind of evolution. And it is not a kind of clear straight line, but it always has this deep kind of moral foundation of standing up for both what he knows is right and for his daughter, and that he wants his daughter to know that he's always on her side, which she knows in an unshakable sense. And as a parent, I would hope that that would be quite universal. I wonder, just in the last couple of minutes, if you could share any updates um, on how Ranjit or how Kieran, are doing now. You say at the end of the, or I guess there's a sort of a card at the end of the film saying, she's studying to be a police officer, and that her family is still in the village, and thankfully safe, and presuming her little siblings are in school and her parents are continuing to kind of work and live. Are there any other updates that you can share as to how they're doing, or anything else that you would like to leave us with today, kind of knowing about the family and what's next for them?
Yeah. So she actually just wrote her a couple of weeks ago. She just wrote her police entry exam. So she's in college, she's in higher education, and she just wrote this exam, and let's see, let's see what happens. But she's in a good space. She's a young woman. She's now almost 20, and she's just figuring out her life and where it's going to go. And Ranjit the family is doing well. They might actually be coming for the Oscars. We're really
Oh, wow.
hoping that they can get their visas and be here. So they were really excited about the film being nominated. They were so over the moon about it. So yeah, they're in a good space, and we're going to be doing a lot of work with them when we start the impact piece of the film.
That's great. Well, I hope they understand that while, of course, the nomination is very much about the storyteller and kind of how more than kind of adept and sensitive and kind of brilliant you are, that it also very much is about their story. And so I hope they do feel that, kind of, that their courage and their persistence, are calls to action, really, for all of us anywhere, to always stand up for our children, but also always to stand up for what's right.
Yeah. Can I just say one last thing? I have to say,
Please, of course.
so interesting that you say that, because it is the reason we're all here, Chelsea. It's the reason you and I are talking. It's the reason that the film is where it's at. It's because of them. And after the nomination, somebody from our team asked them, what they felt about it. And I'm just going to paraphrase what he said. And he said that for him, he wasn't quite sure what the Oscars were, but he understood that they were a really big deal. And he felt that the nomination represented the world, the world resonating with their struggle for justice, and that it was their story. Their story was helping to cast light into darkness, and that he wanted to thank his daughter for giving him the courage to go on the journey. And that was
The courage to catch a tiger. Maybe we all find it when we need it, because we all hope that there are not tigers in the wild, but yet they always lurk until they don't. So really, just Nisha, thank you so much, and enormous kind of gratitude and humility for the courage of this extraordinary young woman, and her father and her family.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.